Welcome to Bear and Balance. I'm Jeff Berckes. On the other side of the screen, Lester A. Wiltfong Jr. Lester, the Chicago Bears are the only undefeated team in the NFC North. We are not even at championship weekend here. So the NFC North goes 0-3 in the playoffs. They are out of it. Huge implications on that last one there. How have you taken the playoffs so far?
I think they've been fun. I think it's been fun to watch. And, I wish as a Bears fan, though, that I can enjoy watching good football with my favorite team, but it's been a long time for that. So I have to just kind of enjoy what I see, when these good teams are playing. It's just good games, close games, pretty good football. Then, of course, there's the refs kind of taking over that Chiefs game, but I think that's just kind of what's going to happen now with a guy like Mahomes.
Yeah, I mean, just a ton of good football, ton of interesting football, ton of kind of frustrating football as well, if depending on who you're cheering for. But it has been overall good. It's treated us well because you got to cheer against the Packers. That's just part of being a Bears fan. That was taken care of. I think you kind of have to cheer against the Vikings. There are some Bears fans that have a decent relationship with Vikings fans in their life. I really don't. I have too many of them. I think they're annoying. They've been laughing at me all year. I think that was nice to see them knocked out of the playoffs quickly. And then the Lions, I don't have a lot of Lions fans in my life. I don't know about you. You're maybe a little closer to Detroit fans, but there's just not a lot where I live. And so I don't really have a lot of Detroit fans in my life. The guys over at our partners over at Pride of Detroit, really good guys. I like working with them. I like how they built the team. It's been kind of fun to watch. I was at the Senior Bowl the year that the Lions coaching staff was there, so I saw Dan Campbell and all that in person. So I had been kind of cheering for them a little bit. And of course, I've been so focused on Ben Johnson the last couple of years because I really liked how he's built that offense. So in some ways, I was cheering for the Lions to win. But in other ways, I was pretty happy.
I'm the same way. I was like, of course, anti-Packers, anti-Vikings, anti-Lions, right? And I'm like, well, it's kind of a fun team, right? You watch them play. Dan Campbell kind of took that team, that whole program, kind of turned it around. Of course, there's the Ben Johnson thing going on right now. So I'm really watching what they do on offense, and it's a lot of fun. I like how they built that franchise. They've had really good drafts the last few years. I'm like, man, this is a up and coming team. It sucks they're doing so well obviously in the Bears division, but it's a fun team to watch. And then I found myself during that game, I figured I'd be, obviously going against, the division. But as the game was going, I felt like, man, I was kind of hoping the Lion would pull it out. And then, of course, there's the whole Commanders narrative that kind of has a lot of Bears fans, a lot of angst there. So it's just, which is kind of weird to me. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it was a fun game and a lot of offense, a lot of points. The better team won that day.
Yeah, I want to handle both of those things before we get into what we're really going to talk about today. But one is this odd rewriting of history that has been going on by some people in Bears fandom, Bears media. Some people are doing it too. This idea that the Bears could have hired Dan Quinn. That's true. They could have. And they could have hired Cliff Kingsbury. True, they could have. That seems to be kind of the obvious mistake here. Or that they could have drafted Jaden Daniels. That was not a real thing. The debate of Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels was very minimal. There really wasn't. Or Drake May, or add in any sort of quarterback controversy. Vast majority of people, all of the scouts that we talked to and listened to and have read for years and years and years, this was very clear cut. Caleb Williams was the better prospect. He also only has 3 years of college, right? There's still more for him to pick up and learn and tap into. Jaden Daniels is a 5th-year senior coming out. So they're not, from a pro ready standpoint, or whatever you want to say, not necessarily coming in on the same footing. Let's see where their careers go. So, the first quarterback taken doesn't always have the best career. These guys have played 1 year. Good for Jaden Daniels. Good for Washington for getting a guy. But this idea that there's some sort of choice this wasn't a couple years ago when the Bears could have drafted Mahomes or Watson or Trubisky, where people were really like, I don't know if any of these guys go. This was clear cut. So let's take that out of the mix. And then going back to the Quinn hire, we're going to get into that today.
Yeah.
We're going to get into what is called a package deal, and we can finally say this on record because there's a piece out there. We're going to spend probably a little bit too much time on it, but I find the idea that the Washington Commanders and the Bears fan base now have a beef to be the weirdest thing, because I don't feel that at all.
I think a lot of it is media driven. The same goes for during the draft process. Most, I would say, 90% of the scouts out there, they all had Caleb as the clear-cut number one. He was the clear-cut top quarterback prospect. But if that's the case, then what's ESPN going to talk about? What is Fox Sports going to talk about? So they had to drum up this narrative like, oh, man, what about Jaden Daniels? What about Drake May? No NFL team was talking like that. But Dan Orlovsky and these guys like that, they had to have something to talk about. So they had to hype up some other prospects. They had to kind of do something to kind of get the juices flowing with the fan base. So then it was Jaden Daniels. Then, of course, the Bears didn't meet with Jaden Daniels outside of the combine and outside of like the pro day stuff. So that's like a big issue there. But why? I mean, Caleb was the guy. They talked to Jaden, they talked to Drake, they talked to all of them. They were focused on their guy, which was Caleb. And I understand that. It makes sense as the process. And a lot of people want to criticize the process, but they did meet with these guys, and every scout, if every scout you have says this is the guy, this is the guy. That's what it was. The narrative was out there because that's what the media wanted. That's what some of the fans wanted. And I bought into it for a while there during the season. Like, I found myself rooting against the Commanders, but you watch Jaden Daniels play, he's pretty damn good. He's kind of fun watching him play football. So that whole beef thing, I'm past it, and now I'm just watching him go out there and do some fantastic things as a rookie. It's pretty cool to watch, and hopefully in 10 years, it's nothing. It's because we're gonna have two good young quarterbacks in the NFC battling out, kind of like Manning and Brady, our version of it.
Yeah, this isn't the Highlander, right? This is like there can be only one, right? There can be many good quarterbacks that come out of the same draft. That has happened in the past, and maybe this is one to do that. And then to back up to your other point about the Detroit game, we're going to talk about this because Detroit losing is huge. Yeah. One, Detroit losing means that these coordinators that a lot of people are pretty interested in hiring are now on the market. Yeah. And it would have taken a much more patient approach by NFL teams to wait on these guys. So I don't have a good historical marker off the top of my head, but this has happened in the past where a good team has lost early. And because they lose early, they expose their coordinators to the hiring process. They lose their coordinators and they become weakened over time because it's rare for teams to slow down. The NFL is trying to get teams to slow down because they see that it is unfair. But now that the Lions have lost, these guys are fair game. We just heard a report from Schefter saying he expects these dominoes to fall quickly. Yeah. They're going to be probably the two next guys to get hired. And then that will then, based on their decision-making, set off these other teams that are waiting and competing here. Now, the Bears are going to be one of those teams competing for one of those coordinators, Ben Johnson. That's pretty much widely speculated that right now he's deciding between Jacksonville, which doesn't sound like a very strong contender right now, Chicago, and Las Vegas. We've got a lot of the Brady stuff going on. We're going to get into some of that. It's a lot. There is a lot going on. That's why we wanted to have this podcast. We decided to do this podcast before the Lions lost, though. Yeah. So this feels even more important for us to talk about this year. Before we get into this, though, I wanted to back up a half a step and talk about the people that are making this decision. And we may look back on this, and this story may be showing us why the Bears maybe weren't ever going to get Ben Johnson, or they were allowed themselves to get outmaneuvered by a franchise like the Raiders. So Kalyn Kahler came out with, I thought, a really interesting piece. Now, this piece touches on a lot of things. It talks about the influence of agents that work for coaches and front office people and how they can influence putting together coaching staffs, putting together front office and marrying that that new general manager with a head coach and basically selling them as a package deal. Now, the reason why that is important for you and me is that we have heard that from pretty reliable sources for a while. We knew, or we had heard, we'll put it that way, that Poles and Eberflus were a package deal. They came together. We couldn't really say that openly because that wasn't widely reported until this report. It was Poles interviewed 3 guys. He picked from the short list. So that's obviously what we kept our narrative to. Now, one of those things that I have had a problem with in terms of teasing it out is how much blame to put on Poles for Eberflus And I've kind of come back around to this decision that I don't think it matters.
Yeah.
You have to just view Poles' performance based on what's happened and whether or not you want to continue with that guy. So I wanted to first get your reaction overall to this story when it came out and what you took from it. And then I'm going to get some of the quotes that Kalyn used from some of the executives and agents around the league that I think are really interesting. So I pulled, I think, 4 different quotes that I just want to go through. And we're going to spend some time on this. I think it's just really fascinating and important to just kind of walk through what I think this meant.
Well, first off, this is fantastic journalism on her part. I mean, this is just one of those things where, like you said, there's been rumblings about this for a long time. Fans have kind of picked up on it. I mean, this is something that a lot of people thought was going on, and no one ever really dove into it. And then when she dove into it like this and kind of got all the quotes and kind of looked around the league and saw that, oh, it's not just a Bears thing, it's kind of interesting. But then she made it very Bears centric, because the Bears are like one of the worst teams that are doing this right now. So that was kind of neat to kind of see that. And here's the thing: there a lot of fans read the piece, and their anger is directed at Trace Armstrong.
Oh yeah,
Trace he has a job to do. His job is to place his clients on teams. He's doing what he has to do. So hey, that's his deal. But shame on the stupid Bears and McCaskies for allowing this to happen, for having their consultants come in and kind of bring this to them. That just shows, no leadership. It's a complete clown show up there. The boobery is on level 10 up there. It just is what it is. This is what we've thought for years about McCaskey and the whole thing. Oh, they don't meddle. Well, you know what? There's meddling been going on there from the McCaskies and Ted Phillips's for a while there. And my hope always was when they hired Kevin Warren, he would kind of right the ship. And it looks like that's really not happening, because we're kind of still seeing some of this stuff behind the scenes play out, where it's like, who's in charge, man? I retweeted a quote from Magic Johnson, of all people. He has the ownership stake in the Washington Commanders. And he talked about how, as an ownership group, they hired people, they put them in place, and they stepped away and let them do their job. And that's why they had that huge turnaround they did. And as Bears fans, that's not happening. We haven't seen that take place in Chicago, because it's still there's someone behind the scenes, pulling the strings like a puppet master. So that's what I want. I want this McCaskey family. I get it. They own the team. They have to have a say. But look, you hired people in place. If Warren's your guy, let Warren be your guy. If he doesn't believe in polls, trust Warren to make his call and get rid of polls. And we're seeing this now come back into play, where this may be a problem and not getting your top candidate.
Yeah, just the idea that, and that's why I wanted to talk about this piece, because if you came out of this and were like, I'm mad at Trace Armstrong, and then there are people that are like, well, Trace Armstrong's that's awesome. He's amazing. He's rich. He's doing yeah, that's great. I don't cheer for the Trace Armstrongs. I cheer for the Chicago Bears, right? So if this is highlighted in a way where it makes the Bears organization look pretty foolish in how they deal with things, or inept, I think is probably a pretty good way to put it. That's what bothers me. And certainly things that I have suspected. And you see all of the Trace Armstrong hires, and you're like, is he just running the organization? Is this just a shadow leader? And of course, good for Trace Armstrong for being good at his job. That is not the criticism here. The criticism is exposing yourself and allowing yourself to be taken advantage of, to have suboptimal hires and suboptimal decision making. And there's a lot that goes into that. But I think we may sit back and say, hey, George McCaskey, he's such a nice guy. It's, he's just such a nice guy. Like, he's not like David Tepper with the Panthers, where he's coming in and demanding they trade up for Bryce Young, pay the price, that he's demanding this guy start over that. Like, he's meddling. Or Woody Johnson, who's playing Madden and saying, this guy's rated 80 in Madden, so I'm not going to trade for him, or whatever that whole thing was. Yeah, I get it that it could be worse in terms of the meddling part, but it's bad. And it's bad in a way that is feckless and directionless. And I think that we're seeing this again play out in real time with this coaching search. And I think that's where we're spending some time here. So I want to read some quotes. So this is from that piece. So it says, this is quote, I've never seen one agent have so much influence on one team and had so little success, but they keep going back and taking his guys, said one coaching agent, who, of course, requested anonymity. All these are going to be anonymous. And I know people hate that, but that is what it is. That's how you get quotes in this world. But continues the quote, and we all kind of shake our heads like, have they not figured this out yet? So that was the first quote that kind of stood out to me as they're just picking from this side pool of candidates, and there's a list, right? Matt Nagy, Matt Eberflus, Mark Helfrich, Luke Getzey, Shane Waldron, Richard Hightower, Kerry Joseph. They're all represented by Trace Armstrong. And this does underlie some issues in terms of some of these coaches just don't have networks. They get into these jobs and they rely on their agent to help fill their staff out. So there's not only a GM to head coach pairing package deals, but there's also how you're going to fill your staff out. And if you don't have those connections, you're relying on your agent to fill those out, which may or may not be what's best for the team.
A lot of it, there's a disconnect, right? Because like we kind of saw, of course, they went the Waldron direction this last time, but not just speaking for the Bears, but other teams run the league. If you don't have a big network, right, and you're kind of relying on your agent to kind of hook you up with the guy, the agent's going to hook you up with his client. You may not have a schematic fit with that guy, but the agent is going to sell it to the coach. Oh, no, it'll be great. He's been with this guy. You guys will eventually figure it out and work things out, and you guys will get on the same page. But, there's always a disconnect there. And that we saw what happened. Like, look at Mark Helfrich. Like, what did he have to do with Nagy's scheme back then? I know at the time, as a fan, I looked at Nagy's diverse coaching staff, and I'm like, wow, he's got guys from this scheme. This could be great. Well, it turned out it wasn't, because there was no direction. Nothing made any sense. You got to have everyone on the same page on your offensive staff. They got to all be having, they all have to speak the same language, and if you have guys you're pulling from different schemes, different backgrounds, that doesn't always work out.
I did pull the other quote from that. So this was about arranging your coach's staff. So, quote, that is absolutely a way to bury your coach, one coaching agent said. This Chicago situation, in parentheses, but this situation is proof positive of that. Believe me, we're not in the building every day. We don't know really how good or bad our guys really are. Yes. They all talk a good game, but we don't know. That's the coaching agent saying that, like, yeah. We don't know exactly what these guys are. So if the coach comes to us and, is asking us to fill this, they're not in the best position to do it. This is an actual coaching agent that is quoted as saying that. And clearly this is happening around the league, and it's proof positive in the Bears that this has been what has been happening.
Yeah, you look at the Shane Waldron hire, for example. That's a Trace Armstrong guy, and Ryan Poles was adamant. I mean, he talked about it at the press conference, how that was pretty much his pick there. They went after him. But how much was it a Poles pick and how much was an Armstrong pick, saying, hey, my guy just got released from his job in Seattle. I think him and some of his guys and staff who also were Trace Armstrong clients, hey, I think this guys would be a great fit for you to kind of turn your offense around. But to the point of this anonymous quote is, Trace Armstrong doesn't know. He doesn't know what's going on in that building. He doesn't see how they actually coach. I'm sure they vetted Waldron quite a bit. It was clearly the wrong decision. There was just something wrong here. I wonder what Pete Carroll would have had to say had they talked to Pete Carroll, or had they spent a lot of time with Pete Carroll about the process. I wonder if they were even allowed to talk to him, since he was still technically under contract with the Seahawks at the time. But that was a problem. I mean, most fans, most analysts thought, hey, man, this is a great hire. He just had a pretty good job, pretty good run in Seattle. He's from the McVay tree. This didn't work out great. It did not. Again, fans and analysts aren't in those rooms making these calls. Trace Armstrong was. Ryan Poles was. McCaskey's were. Kevin Warren kind of, this is an instance where Kevin Warren backed his guy. This is a Poles hire, right? So this is Kevin Warren. Hey, Poles is the GM. It's your call. Let's go. And he kind of seemed like at that press conference when they fired Flus, it seemed like that was the one time Poles really had a chance to kind of talk up, where Warren didn't kind of dominate the conversation. To me, I took that as Warren's letting Poles kind of, sink his own ship there, because that was your guy. That's how I kind of took that. So I want more of that. Right or wrong, if you put a guy in place, let him do his job. If you sink or swim on your own, that's your call. You got to make it, and it has to happen.
All right, a couple more. one about George McCaskey and one about Ted Phillips. So let's start with the Ted Phillips one. So, quote, Armstrong has had more influence with the Bears than any other team, coaching agent said. That's because he was dealing with an accountant that really didn't know football people, and he took advantage of that. And I give him credit for that. So I wanted to make sure I pulled that quote because one, this guy's saying like, hey, Trace Armstrong is doing his job, right? And the story goes into Ted Phillips helped negotiate Trace Armstrong's rookie contract. So way back when Trace Armstrong was a rookie for the Bears, he held out. Ted Phillips helped make sure that holdout ended before the season. He got that taken care of. So they've had a long relationship, right? And then, listen, I was wrong. For years and years and years, I was like, why are people complaining about Ted Phillips? Who cares? But the more you get into this, the more you realize that they didn't have the infrastructure in place of real football people to make decisions or help people like George McCaskey make decisions. And so when you're relying on your good friend whose background is in accounting and has nothing to do with football, but you're in charge of football operations from 1999 to 2021, according to the story, that's bad. That's why you had to go out and hire a guy like Kevin Warren, is to say, okay, hey, you're a football guy. Yes, people say, he's a politician, blah, blah, blah. Kevin Warren's a football guy. He's been in football building his whole life. Yes, he's got that political skill, which is necessary and important for things like building a stadium. So like, I'm not out on Kevin Warren by any stretch of the imagination. He still needs to do some things, flex some muscle. But this is me saying all of the things that I said probably 7-8 years ago when I was like, who cares about Ted Phillips?
Yeah.
I was very much wrong. This guy really did allow for a lot of bad decision making by not being a competent decision maker for this organization.
Well, you can look at the guy, the chairman, George McCaskey. He admits he doesn't know much about football himself. He admits he's nothing but a fan, right? He kind of came up, obviously he's a McCaskey, which is why he's got the gig in the first place. But, he has no background in being a leader of this magnitude. His number one guy, Ted Phillips, again, accountant. That's how he kind of came up. And, obviously he understands business to a point, but, it's not like this is like a donut shop. I mean, this is an NFL franchise, right? You got to have different leadership skills to kind of do this gig. And if you got McCaskey and you got Phillips, and I'm assuming they surrounded themselves with people that kind of were the like-minded, so it's no wonder that McCaskey has to hire a consulting firm to kind of tell him how to do his job so many times. And you just hope one time they would get it right. And like, again, going back to Kevin Warren, he's not a football guy like Peyton Manning's a football guy. That's, I know a lot of Bears fans, they should hire him as the team president. But like 3 decades in working in the NFL or the Big Ten. I mean, this is a guy that's been around it most of his adult life. He's been on the agent side of things. He's been on the team side of things. He has a good wide range. As far as Ted Phillips versus Kevin Warren, that's not even a comparison anyone can make. It's night and day. I mean, one guy definitely is who he says he is, and Phillips is, again, he's just an accountant that kind of lucked into the position. So it's no surprise. I mean, we hear people around the league saying stuff like the Bears are just, the franchise is a mess. I mean, in Bill's last article that he tried to talk to people around the league, it's the same thing. It's some of the process here is bad, and it's just like, this is the Bears because they don't put people in place. They don't let them run the ship.
All right, one more quote that I pulled. So this was about ownership, and this former coach said that he talked to a bunch of owners, and they were quoting about a conversation with Jeffrey Lurie, the Eagles head coach, Eagles owner, sorry. And he was very detailed in what he wanted, and a head coach knew why he wanted it, laid it all out. And so his quote was, the dude, Jeff Lurie, knew exactly what he wanted. If I were to ask other owners, it was like, well, we're looking for a good leadership guy or a guy who can make the quarterback better. It's not an all-encompassing criteria, end quote. And what stood out to me was like, this didn't say like George McCaskey is that guy that is saying, well, we just want a better leadership guy. But we know that it is, because when he's been asked these questions at these press conferences, he says random stuff like that. Like, it wasn't this cycle. It was the last cycle where he's like, what, a guy that has a lot of grit.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there was just the things that he says are nonsense. And so there's not a shock that a guy like Lurie has been able to have a consistently successful team and in the Eagles, because he is helping push in the right direction. Whereas it seems like the stream of momentum that is produced by McCaskey, you got to swim upstream to try to get anywhere.
I have never heard George McCaskey speak, or I'm not left this befuddled, like, why is this idiot allowed in front of a microphone? I get it. He's the chairman. He's the owner. He's the face of that part of the franchise, but go away, man. I mean, you offer nothing. I mean, you offer nothing to the fans. You offer nothing as a leader. More often than not, you're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing the Bears. If fans see it, you don't think other teams and other free agents and other prospective coaches all see this? Again, put your guy in place, let him run the show, step away, just come out to sign a few checks. You don't have to be involved in the day-to-day operations. I mean, it's an NFL franchise, man. It's a moneymaker. I get it that this is the McCaskey's main source of income, because they don't really have a lot of a big portfolio like some of these other owners around the league, but man, step away. Shut the hell up. I'm so sick and tired of hearing George out there offer nothing of substance except for what he does when he embarrasses himself.
George McCaskey's been on the job for 14 years.
Terrible.
He's had 4 general managers in that time. He's had 5 head coaches. He's going to have a 6th here. So he inherited Jerry Angelo and Lovie Smith. And then he hires Phil Emery, who then fires Lovie Smith and then brings in Mark Trestman. Those 2 get fired together because of that debacle. So then he brings in Ernie Accorsi, a consultant, to help him make these hires, which essentially I think kind of is what we're talking about here too, because that felt very much a package deal with Ryan Pace and John Fox, but it may not have been an agent-driven thing. It was like they put them together. And it seemed pretty clear that Ryan Pace and John Fox weren't on the same page, and Pace was ready to get his next hire. Now we know this because Pace did not tell Fox that he was drafting Mitchell Trubisky.
Yeah.
Seems like that's something that general manager and a head coach should be on the same page on, right? So then Pace gets a new coach, Matt Nagy, and that's where the Trace Armstrong influence starts. And then when those guys are fired, a year too late, I might add, they go out and they hire Bill Polian. Bill Polian's in this article. Bill Polian says, I never talk to agents, which, okay, sure, buddy. I'm sure that's a real thing. But yet both Poles and Eberflus come in as this package deal as a result of the Bill Polian consultant-led process. One of the other interviewees was clearly a Bill Polian guy. Eberflus is a Bill Polian, connection as well. So none of this is particularly surprising in terms of what happens, but it's because your owner doesn't know what he wants. So he hires somebody in the league as a consultant to tell him what he wants. And then this is what you end up with, is picking from a smaller pool of candidates. So this is like the history of where we're at. And if you're in the league and you know all of this, even if some of this isn't reported, that's why this article is just so nice to me, because there's some stuff that we've heard over the years, but it's not public. So it's not like we can talk about it or know for sure that this is, this is enough to go on the record. It's on the record now. We can talk about this. And so how are you going to change that? What is going to be different? So I wanted to talk about the process, Lester. And I wanted to talk about this from the perspective of, I keep seeing what the Bears are doing is terrible process. It's bad process. Their coaching search is bad process. It's bad process. And I think was actually probably really good defensible process if you're a company hiring, a president or a vice president or something, or a position that most of us can relate to. The process is pretty sound. Everybody in the first round of interviews goes through a virtual round, and then we'll bring you back in person for a second round interview. Now, I know they kind of broke that with McCarthy, but that's pretty good HR process, right? The problem is when people that are complaining about that, what you don't actually want process. You want them to be cutthroat and aggressive and go out and get their guy. Lester, do you think that the NFL likes what Robert Kraft did to go out and hire Mike Vrabel, where he brought in Pep Hamilton and Byron Leftwich, two coaches of people of color, to satisfy the Rooney Rule, that haven't been in the league for more than a year, so that they could interview in person early to satisfy that Rooney Rule, so that they could go out and get Vrabel? Do you think the NFL would say that that's good process?
I mean, the NFL has rules in place. They want things to be as slow as possible. And you know, the Patriots, they've always kind of just done their own thing. They don't care. Right? This is what they do. That they have their vision. They know what they want, and they went out and did it. Was it kind of underhanded the way the whole thing went? Yeah, I mean, it kind of made it look bad. But at the end of the day, that's the Patriots. I mean, that's the Patriot way. I mean, it helps when you have Belichick and Brady winning all those titles. But you know, as long as Kraft's been running the show there, that's Kraft's show. He does things his way. And one thing from afar, you know, that's a well-run organization.
You didn't answer my question. Would the NFL say that's good process?
That's tricky, because I think they would probably, the results happen, so that's probably they would say yes, but I don't think they'd want it to go down that way. I think they want to drag it out.
I think they would hate that process.
Yeah, I mean,
because
that's why the rules are in place, right? They can't interview this guy because they're playing here. This team's playing, you have to wait till this one day where there's a window to kind of meet with coaches. If you're still playing, you can't talk to anyone until after the fact. The NFL wants to drag this out because they want everyone to kind of have a chance to talk to people. But I think eventually what's going to happen is they're going to kind of push this whole thing back, where you can't. They're either going to make it to where it's a free for all again, like it used to be, or they're going to make it to where you can't talk to anyone until after the Super Bowl, which I think probably should happen, because that's probably the only fair way to do it. Is you can't really talk to anyone until the team is eliminated. I think that makes the most sense.
That's a whole timing thing with the combine and all that stuff is crazy, right? And so then things are just going to happen behind the scenes, and it's going to be insane. So I think my point is, there's no way that the NFL liked what happened, liked what happened in New England. They hated it. They had to have hated that, because they flaunted the rules in their face, right? Like that, they skirted everything to go out and get their guy. Do you think Robert Kraft cares? Do you think Robert Kraft thinks anything negative of this? Like, this was without question a good result for Robert Kraft.
Yeah.
So he does not care that he didn't follow the spirit of the rule. He went out, he wanted that guy. He probably thought that last year, or at least at some point in this year where it wasn't going where he thought. He was trying to figure out how to maneuver out of this, because he fired Mayo instantly at the end of the year, and then he set things in motion. I'm sure the conversations that happened, I wouldn't be shocked if this was already agreed upon at some point in the year that Vrabel was going to come and take over. A lot of Bears fans thought the Bears should have gone after Vrabel, should have brought him in person. You know, they kind of made an attempt that ship had sailed, right? Kraft paid a penalty for stealing Belichick away from the Jets. Do you think he cares?
Yeah.
No, right? So I think my thought is, when I hear Bears fans or Bears media say this process is bad, the process is defensible. It's a committee that has an HR person on it. It's got all these different ideas and people that are in on the interviews. They break them out into different interview times for Warren and McCaskey to talk to them, and for Poles to have individual time, and for the group interview and all that. The process is defensible. You don't want that process, though. You want them to go out and fight dishonorably. It reminds me of Game of Thrones, which, Lester, I don't know if you ever watched Game of Thrones.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. So like, first season, Tyrion Lannister gets falsely accused. He's up in the Eyrie, like this whole thing. So the people that didn't watch the show, essentially, think of knights and all that kind of stuff, right? And he gets found guilty of this crime. He's going to be put to death. So he asks for a champion to fight in his honor and let the gods decide. Bronn, who's a sellsword, volunteers to be his champion, and he fights a knight. And Bronn wins. The sellsword wins because he fights dirty. I mean, he does not fight as a knight, and he throws the other knight down, out of the mountain, and he's told, you did not fight honorably. And he said, no, but he did. And he points to the guy that he just threw off the mountain. And I think like George McCaskey can sit here at the end of the day and say, well, we fought this honorably. Like, that's the point, is like, I think the Bears in some ways are going to lose with honor. And I think that is in many ways more important to this organization than it is to do what's needed, because the Raiders right now did what was needed. They fired their GM, who was in place for 1 year, because they heard what it was going to take for Ben Johnson to come take a head coaching job. And he said GM alignment and stability. The Raiders are even worse than the Bears at stability and instability right now, right? And they heard that and they said, okay, we're going to wipe our GM out and we're going to align this with you. And the Bears heard that and said, well, we can still convince him.
Well, as soon as the Patriots got rid of Mayo, it's like everyone knew, okay, this is why. I mean, they're going after Vrabel, let's connect the dots. It's a no-brainer. Same thing in Vegas. As soon as they got rid of the GM, because there was no Ben Johnson talk to Vegas before they got rid of the GM. As soon as that happened, everyone's like, oh, here we go. This is why they're doing it, because, look, you can't talk to Ben Johnson as a franchise, right? You can't go talk to him during this whole process, but the same with Vrabel. The Pats can't go talk to Vrabel, but your people can talk to his people, set things up. What does Vrabel want to do? Hey, we think we'd like to have him as our head coach. It's just all this back channel stuff. And look, it's skirting the rules, of course, but it's not breaking the rules. And that's what the Patriots do. That's what the Raiders do. So I'm sure at some point there was a conversation made where it was, hey, we've seen this idea floated out by the media that Ben Johnson wants alignment. Is this true? Yes, it's true. We're going to fire our GM. Let's go get Ben Johnson. So the Bears had to have known this. And like you said, they decided to keep him. And the worst thing about keeping Poles is they're being so secretive about the process. The whole, a year is a lifetime, Kevin Warren says. It's like, what are we doing here? Look, if you're not going to line him up with your coach, if you think you kind of can sell this, and then I heard some fans saying, well, it's because they're leaving the door open to fire him later. That'll make the Bears look even worse. They're not going to fire Poles later in the process. It's either fire him, extend him, or let him sit as a lame duck. And that third option makes you look the worst of anything. Firing him would have made you look better, because then at least you know, hey, I'm sorry, this is what happened here. And look, there's an argument can be made of why you could have fired Poles, right?
Yes.
The same with Flus should have been fired a year ago. Again, plenty of arguments to be made there. Hey, look, this is not the right timing for you. You did a good job getting us A to B. You're not getting us to C guy. We're going to move on. And we got Caleb coming in number one. Let's line it up. Line up the whole thing here. They didn't do it. Okay. Here we are again. Ben Johnson may go elsewhere because of Ryan Poles. Now, maybe he can work with Poles. Maybe the Bears can sell him on this whole thing. Maybe he was extended behind the scenes and we just don't know that as fans or as anyone in the media, but it sure looks bad out there. And for a franchise that seems to be always worried about the optics, they make the stupidest mistakes time and time again about the optics all the time. It's just frustrating.
Couple more nuggets. We'll throw it to a break and we'll get into actual coaching candidates. So the quote that you're talking about from Kevin Warren on Poles was 1 year is a lifetime. Now I interpreted that as maybe Kevin Warren not super happy about keeping Ryan Poles and is just kind of like, hey, there's a lot of things that can change in a year. We're not gonna talk about that, right? George talking about alignment, and Bill did a good job of talking about this, I think, on his last podcast. But George says, well, that idea has never come up in interviews. It's a non-issue, right? The idea of aligning everything up. But
every time George speaks, he's a dumbass.
Every time he speaks, it's just better to be thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt.
Yes,
that's George McCaskey. Every time he opens his mouth, it's like, oh yeah, no, this guy's a fool. Okay, so misalignment, 2016. Pace, Fox, Cuddy. 2017, Pace, Fox, Trubisky, who he didn't tell Fox that that's who he was drafting. You can't make this up. You can't make this up. So obviously Fox is on the way out. 2018 is Pace, Nagy, Trubisky. Again, Trubisky isn't Nagy's guy, but he tries to make it work. 2018, there's some success. 2019 sort of falls off a cliff. You go to 2021, Pace, Nagy are kept, and they draft Fields with a playoffs or bust mandate. Nagy doesn't think Fields is ready. Gets pushed.
Real quick, you're leaving off the best part of this whole thing is when Matt Nagy brought in Nick Foles because Nick Foles was his guy.
Right.
And,
sure.
And Nick Foles is also your guy, right?
No. Nick Foles is the one of the very few Bears that I actively cheered against.
Yeah.
I just there's just zero chance that I was cheering for Nick Foles, that I thought it was a good idea. I killed that move. So 2021, it's Pace, Nagy, and Fields in a playoffs or get out year. Obviously, they don't make the playoffs. They get out. 2022, you bring in Poles and Flus. I think Poles and Flus sold McCaskey on the idea that maybe Fields wasn't the guy, but there was a teardown. And then they gave Fields the opportunity to try to win, in the next year with a little smidgen of help, but not too much. And then you got 2024 with Caleb now playing with Foles and Flus. Flus is fired. So 2025, you let Poles hire a second coach for Caleb. So again, you're just continuing with this misalignment. So the idea that George McCaskey can't figure out that this is a thing and that maybe he should try to line everything up, had the opportunity to do it last year to align at least coach and quarterback. This year, you could say, okay, we got the quarterback, young quarterback. We're going to come in and we're going to find a GM and a head coach to align with that quarterback that's in place to move forward. You're not going to do that. You're going to let Poles be potentially on a lame duck year, was what we believe, to maybe decide his fate after this year. I mean, just this continues. Plus, you've added Kevin Warren, which I think is good. I think you had to have somebody in there that had some football background to help you make decisions. But now you've added Kevin Warren in during 2023, where he sat around and did some meditation and figured out what he liked or what he didn't like about the organization. But now you have another piece that maybe is adding into this cycle. So it is insane to me that this guy can continue to make the same decisions 14 years in, and you're starting to get a reputation of having a lot of changeover. Not starting. You have the reputation of having a lot of changeover and that your organization's a mess.
It wasn't much better when his brother had the reins, like during the Mike McCaskey era. It was just as messed up then. So
it's been a steep decline. They've succeeded in spite themselves for these various spike years. It's amazing the power of fandom, because we are all insane for sticking with this team based on all of the evidence that we have contrary. So quick break. Other side of this, we're going to talk about the actual coaching candidates. Stick with us. All right, Lester. So I know that was a lot to get through, but I have been just dying to talk about this since that article came out. So all the things that are going on, things that we're hearing, we will see. Despite everything, they still have a chance. Yeah. They still have a chance to get this right. And there's not just one right answer. We're going to get into this a little bit. We're going to talk about who we think are the main candidates here. You have to start off with Ben Johnson. 3 straight years in Detroit, putting together a top 5 offense. I think he has proven to be the top hire in this cycle. Others may say it's Aaron Glenn. Bears are not going to hire Aaron Glenn. He's not even interested in this job. They're not interested in him. That's not what's happening. He is the top candidate, we believe, in New Orleans and for the New York Jets, the team that drafted him. So that is another domino for us to consider. And we'll talk about that at some point in terms of how these jobs get filled and maybe how that influences the Bears. But I want to start with Johnson, because at first it sounded like he would probably have his pick between the Bears and the Jaguars. Who would, do you want to go to Trevor Lawrence? Do you want to not pay taxes in Jacksonville? Do you want to travel to London a couple times a year? Or do you want to be in Chicago, and be in a good city, and, all those things that we had those conversations about, right? Or is it now the Raiders, because they fired their coach a little later, and then they entered the fray with the Brady conversation of we're going after him, we're willing to wait for him, whatever. Now it's kind of sounding like maybe the Bears and the Raiders there's some distance between them and the Jags as the third team. Let's just establish what is attractive to you about Ben Johnson and the Chicago Bears coming together and making him the next head coach?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about Ben Johnson for a while on the show, and it's just his scheme. I mean, it's his scheme. I mean, that's right there is what's really neat about it. Is it something he's kind of crafted and created throughout his years working with, I mean, for being honest, a lot of former Bears coordinators, Gase, Loggins, Bill Lazor. I mean, he's worked with a lot of these guys. So it's kind of weird that now here he is having a chance to interview for the Bears head coaching job. And I'm assuming he'll take an in-person interview. It just came out today by Jonathan Jones, CBS Sports, saying that there is a lot of talk this morning about Ben Johnson and Chicago. So there's some buzz behind the scenes happening. I still have a feeling it's going to be the Raiders because look, you got two dysfunctional franchises, but if you have one franchise you can go to and you can line things up with the GM, I think that's where Johnson goes. Even though, I mean, look, the Bears seem like a better landing spot as far as what's on the field, but if he's given a 5-6 year deal, a huge contract and assurances that, hey, we're going to do this rebuild with you, you can kind of create this team in your image. I mean, that's pretty nice to hear as far as we're coming to Chicago. Yes, he may have a better quarterback right now, but again, if you don't have the same vision, the same, direction as the general manager in place, Ryan Poles, I can see why the Raiders would be something enticing. But yeah, I mean, Johnson checks all the boxes, and I saw a lot of stuff. I knew this would happen, right? I knew as soon as he did something cute that backfired.
Oh yeah,
he get turned on, and it was a bad play call at the time with the interception from Jameson. Something he probably shouldn't have thrown. But look, if I'm a wide receiver in the NFL and I get my number called to throw a pass, I'm throwing a pass. I mean, that is what it is. It's what happens with these guys. So bad play call. But look, his offense was moving the ball, but they just weren't moving it enough, and then defense was doing nothing. I mean, Aaron Glenn's defense, as good as a head coach candidate he is, what are they missing? Like 6-7 starters over there?
Tons of starters missing. That team was pretty decimated, and they didn't lose because of one play call. And Goff was
bad,
reverting to being Jared Goff. He was making some bad decisions that kind of broke him. I thought it was predictable and kind of funny that Bears fans would turn against Ben Johnson for one play call. They say,
he's too cute.
I'm sorry. The body of work is overwhelming. There is a preponderance of evidence that this is an incredible head coaching candidate because of what he was able to do with Jared Goff at the point, right?
Yeah.
And that didn't result in a Super Bowl, but who cares, right? That's not the Bears' problem. The Bears are trying to look forward. What are you projecting this guy can do forward with you and the pieces that you have and that you can put with him moving forward? So I think that the stuff that we're hearing with the Raiders, we don't know what is going into his decision making, right? And so there's a lot of, I think people would call it cope, but I feel like it's such a diss when I hear people say, "Oh, that's just cope," right? But
it's really negative sounding, right?
It sounds very negative, like, "Oh, you're just saying that to heal yourself." But I am seeing a lot of people say, "Well, if he takes the Raiders job, he's not as smart as what I think he is, and therefore, why would I want him?" Right? And it's that old, the Groucho Marx thing. I would never become a member of a club that would have me as a member, or whatever the quote is. And it's like, I don't know, man. That doesn't change his candidacy. It doesn't change the type of coach and play caller that he is. And I certainly still want that for the Bears. If he ends up going to the Raiders, I think that you got to look in the mirror as a Bears fan and say, well, how does that break down? Because on paper, the Bears are a better landing spot because they've got a quarterback. They've got more pieces in place. They're closer to competing. They're not in the same division as Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert and Sean Payton. They have three really good established coaches. I mean, I don't think it's crazy to think that Sean Payton isn't that far away from a Hall of Fame coach candidacy. Andy Reid's one of the best to ever do it. He's obviously a Hall of Fame coach. Jim Harbaugh might not ever make the Hall of Fame, but just because he's started a little later in his coaching career. But I mean, he is as good of a coach as there is. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes, one of the best to ever do it. Justin Herbert's got all the tools to put together all pro campaigns. I mean, I'm not sold on Bo Nix as a guy, but like Sean Payton can certainly make you competitive with that. And you're gonna just waltz in there with the worst roster and a weird owner. Like like I don't know. That seems crazy to me. But he might be intrigued by the idea of building it with somebody from scratch and saying, well, I'm in this for 2028, 2029, 2030, right? Like that maybe where his mind is. I can build this up and have the runway, as opposed to going into this cycle with Chicago where I don't know if they're going to fire their GM. I don't know what the vision is. I don't really know this guy. So I don't know what he prioritizes in his decision making, but if we see him go to Vegas, I think it's exactly that.
Yeah, I mean, as fans, we look at our team, right? And clearly the Bears are a dysfunctional organization. And we look at other franchises. Oh man, the Raiders, that's a mess too. I mean, they have coaching changes, GM changes. Their owner is maybe at the level of boobery as McCaskey is. Who knows? But the fact that the top candidate would rather take that over the Bears, that tells you all you need to know about how dysfunctional the Bears do things. And it's not just Ben Johnson making that choice. That's league wide. People see this. That's why it's all about the Bears have to get lucky and get the right people in place, because nothing will change until they change it. You hear about the culture. Look, you want to have a good culture, win some friggin' games. You know what I mean? There was no culture in Detroit until there was a little shift in leadership. Dan Campbell came in, they got the right GM, and it happened. And now that's a pretty damn good team. They didn't make it all the way this year, obviously, but that's still a pretty damn good team, well-run organization. Bears haven't got to that point yet. So Ben Johnson is our top choice. I think we did that article, the roundtable last week, and pretty much every one of our guys at Windy City Gridiron and Second City Gridiron that chimed in. Ben Johnson's our top choice. I don't think any of us think it's going to happen though.
So let's say that it doesn't happen. Let's say that he goes to the Raiders. What we have heard is that among the top candidates, if not the top candidate at this point right now, is Mike McCarthy. Now, I don't like this. Right? This is not my thing. Now, there are plenty of Bears fans that like this idea. They like the resume. They like that he's won a lot of games. I feel like Mike McCarthy is a bit of a mirror. Like he kind of he holds up a mirror to your roster, and he's going to be able to take it. I don't think he elevates. I don't think he sinks you. So I feel like he is somewhat of a replacement level type of hire. That might sound harsh. The guy has a Super Bowl trophy, a Super Bowl ring to his credit. I remember that very well. And if you're a Bears fan and have been around for more than 5 minutes, you remember that run pretty well too, because it featured the Bears very prominently in that run. I don't think this is just a life, 15, 20 years or whatever of just not liking Mike McCarthy because he coached for the Packers. I just don't see the creativity in the offense, but his offense scored a lot of points, right? So like, I get that might sound hollow or false. I'm not sure that he's cutting edge enough for me to say I can project him confidently to be a good creative offensive play caller with Caleb Williams to develop him to the ceiling that I think that he has. So for me, I think this is an uncreative type of a hire. And I feel like this is also why it's probably going to happen, because this feels like a committee hire. Like this feels like multiple people coming in, and they can there's maybe not their first choice, but it's something that they can all agree to, right? It's like, hey, we couldn't agree on, the type of pizza. So we just got like one pepperoni and we got one cheese, and it's pizza. So, just deal with it. Right. It's not anybody's ideal, but it's something that everybody can kind of live with.
I think he'd be the safest pick. I think so. You call him replacement level. I think it's a little higher than that if this were a few years ago. I think at this point in his career, my concern is he just kind of going through the motions. I mean, we heard some stories coming out of Dallas. A few of the Cowboy beat reporters talked about some of the stuff he did behind the scenes, where he was checked out in certain instances. I know there was a massage story built in there where he was upstairs doing something during a team meeting and no one knew where he was. And this happened a few times. There were other things where you're just like, well, is he not engaged fully? I mean, he's 61, 62 years old right now. Maybe he's just going through the motion at this point in his career. I want young energy, right? I want a guy to come in and kind of, this is my shot. I got to do it my way or the highway. With McCarthy, I think he'll be fine. I think he's okay. I think he's going to be way better than what the Bears have had in the past, right? But is that what we're shooting for here? The safe guy that kind of hopefully we can kind of get us back to respectability. I guess if you're looking at the process of where the Bears are on the timeline as a committee approach, maybe that's what they want. Hey, let's get a guy in place that won't embarrass us. That'll be okay. To kind of get us back to the playoff contention. Again, is he engaged fully? I think his offense is fine. It works pretty good. I mean, he's kind of kept up with the times. You kind of watch what he's done there. He's kind of had some other younger OCs in with him that kind of bounced off ideas, kind of done things together. I haven't really done a deep dive into what he does there, but like you said, he's still putting up big points. His offense still moved the ball. I mean, he managed to win some games with Dak out this last season. And I'm just not excited by the hire. I mean, he'd be okay. I'd come around on it eventually as a fan because, again, this is the best guy they've had in a long time. And I just want to get that damn team in the playoffs. I want to root for a winning team again. I think he'll do that. Like I said, my only concern is, again, we talk about the culture. We talk about the winning culture you want to establish. Is he going to be a guy that's going to get that to the next level? I'm not sure there.
I don't think he has kept up with the times, but that's my opinion. So we can debate that. Certainly some star power in Dallas, and they were able to be competitive. I think that's all fine, right? Like there are opinions to be had there. I think he has been rightfully criticized for having some staleness to his offense. Maybe he has evolved a time or two. I'm just not sure that he's kept up with it. Also, why wouldn't they just re-sign him in Dallas if they felt really good about this?
Well,
right?
Like, he's good. He knows offensive football. Dak Prescott, I think, is one of the more underrated quarterbacks. He's a pretty good quarterback. They've got some fantastic receivers there. Jerry Jones is the guy that's always understood, going after the O-line. He's always had pretty good offenses around him there, but he couldn't get over the hump there in Dallas. Like you said, they're letting him go. I mean, if he was such a critical part of their success, why not re-sign him? They let him sit out a whole lame duck year, which is it's unheard of. Teams don't do that in the NFL. You're going into your last year of contract. You either extend them or you make a move. Like the whole point of that was just strange. So there must have been something behind the scenes. Look, you can be as good as an offense as you can, but if there's no trust from ownership in you, which there obviously wasn't, otherwise he would have been, extended. That's to me, that's telling, which is why I go back to, I don't trust him, being fully engaged and kind of taking the culture where it needs to go.
And when I say replacement level, I don't think that that's probably the wrong word, because that's when you use that for a roster, that means you can just go on the street and pick somebody up. I don't think he's an addition or a subtraction, right? Like where I think Flus was a subtraction. I think he was actively hurting your team as the head coach. So you're removing a negative, which is a positive. That's good. I think that McCarthy is not a guy that's a negative. So let me just put that out there. I don't think he's elevating. I think he's reflecting back what your roster is. And so he's had some good rosters. I think they've had some good rosters in Dallas, but I don't think he's elevating anybody. And then when you get to the playoffs, in general, all of those teams are good. And so what's the differentiator there? And I don't think that he's elevating things in terms of scheme or in terms of game planning or anything like that. So when things get more than just the talent on the field, he's getting outcoached, right? So that's what I would worry about if they bring him in. I'm not sure that he's elevating this at all. Again, he's not a negative. He's not a drag. The Eberflus thing, that was a drag, right? So at least it's better than that. I think, in many ways, I do think it's kind of a John Fox type of hire. And I know people are going to be very visceral in that because they're going to say John Fox was terrible. I think John Fox was a fine football coach. And I think that that was a terrible roster. And that roster really had no chance, but he didn't necessarily elevate that roster, but he did what he could. Right? I don't think he was a drag. That's maybe what I'm trying to say, and just not saying it as eloquently.
That makes sense. It makes sense.
if there is, I don't want to call it a dark horse candidate, but let's say that it's someone who could maybe improve their stock if, again, Ben Johnson chooses to go elsewhere. Maybe Mike McCarthy signs on to be the Saints head coach before the Bears are ready to make an offer, or maybe he prefers that job. We've heard him connected to that organization. He has some ties there. He knows their decision makers there quite well, has some good relationships there. So maybe he prefers the Saints job over the Bears job anyway. But Todd Monken, now, this is a guy I think we need to talk about. The other game that maybe it wasn't maybe a surprise because that game was kind of a coin flip, but because the Ravens lost, Todd Monken is now available and he is in this mix. And we heard from David Kaplan, right? That we heard that Monken had a really good interview. He's a Wheaton, Illinois native. The Monken family supposedly is big, well-known coaching family in Illinois. This sounds like a guy that could really elevate his stock based on where he's at in his career. He's 58 years old. He's been all around, worked his way up, been an offensive coordinator a couple times now, shown success. He went back to college. He had success at the college level, helping Georgia win a couple of national championships, turned around a program as a head coach in Southern Mississippi, Southern Missouri.
I think so. One of those.
So, one of those schools. It took over a winless program and was able to elevate that to a winning record by the time he left. So he has some really good history in terms of being a leader, a head coach, college level, pro level, offensive scheme. He's elevated, I think, in my opinion, elevated Lamar Jackson's game as a passer the last couple of years. He's really been able to take a step with Monken calling plays. And so I think that he is kind of a perfect candidate in many, many ways. You said you want some youthful energy. 58 years old may not be youthful, but it would be a first-time head coach. So you would get that, this is my shot. This is my one time. To me, this very much reminds me of Bruce Arians, who got his first shot when he was like 61. The Bears famously should have hired him, but told him he needed to keep a defensive coordinator in place that didn't even want to be here. So he went to Arizona, had, some success there, and then eventually won a Super Bowl in Tampa. So to me, Monken is the guy that I have as my number 2. I know you agree with me, but what do you think Monken has to do to maybe put himself in the position to take this job?
Yeah, Monken's my number 2, and it's, you kind of just look at his body of work. It makes you wonder, why wasn't he more in the mix during these head coach cycles early in his career? I mean, he had some success, in Tampa. He has, a lot of times people look back, well, he was a college guy. Well, he had almost a decade in the NFL prior to that. Like I said, he took over a college, kind of turned the whole program around, then. So he, out of all the candidates now, as far as the you want that leader of men thing, he's done that. Okay, it's college, but still it's you're running the ship. Everything is your call. You're in charge of everything. You're the overseer of the whole program. He's done that. He can kind of lean back on some of that experience and knowledge he gained from that time in college. And like you said, Georgia, a couple national championships. What he's done with Lamar has been fantastic. This is my one thing with certain people looking at these candidates. They knock Ben Johnson for having a good offensive around him. Oh, so you're saying Ben Johnson's going to have the same O-line here in Chicago? He's going to have, Jamar Gibbs at running back and these outstanding players. And they say do the same with Monken. Oh, so Monken, is he going to bring a Jackson with him to Chicago and that O-line? I mean, these guys have worked with what they're having here. Part of the reason why they all have success, is the coaching as well. I mean, we've seen the Lions before, Johnson. We've seen the Ravens before Monken. He's kind of done things and elevated things around him. And then the big knock on him this year is, he runs the ball too much. Is he going to bring Derrick Henry with him? Well, he's kind of flipped his offense a bit because of Henry. He's able to kind of show that creativity and kind of do things differently this year that he didn't do year one in Baltimore, because this year he's got a Hall of Fame running back there with him. So again, they lost. And same thing with Ben Johnson losing. I saw Bears fans out on Monken because they lost that game. It's just weird. Look at the body of work. Don't look at the last thing he did here. He's getting criticized for the Mark Andrews drop. Well, they should have just ran Derrick Henry there. The dude dropped the freaking 2-point conversion. We're going to blame that on Monken. It's just
lose the turnover battle 3-0 and still had a chance to tie it up at the end of the game.
Yeah. I mean, he's a good coach, and I did talk about youthful energy, but like you said, he kind of brings that as far as the newness of it. If this was 10 years ago and he's doing what he's doing now, no brainer. And the Arians things, perfect, correlation there. But then you also look at, okay, Vic Fangio's another guy, kind of was a long-time assistant in the league, kind of finally had a chance to run his own show, and it didn't work out for him. So will Monken be the Fangio, or will he be the Arians? And I think as an offensive creativity guy, I think he may be the Arians guy. And then you look at the aesthetic, right? That clip came out with him the other day with the play sheet in his pants. It's like he came out of Central Casting. You kind of hear him talk. Some of these mic'd up clips he has. Like, yeah, that's a head coach, dude. I mean, that's a guy that you want to have, leading your team. Like you said, the Illinois connection, we've seen this franchise lean on that in the past. So I would not be surprised if that plays into it a little bit. But also, like you said, he had a chance to get in front of that room, kind of wowed them with what he wants to do. This is my number 2 behind Ben Johnson for sure.
We can only hope. Seeing some stuff that this might be a 2-horse race between Ben Johnson and Mike McCarthy, meaning that it's a 1-horse race with Ben Johnson, and if he chooses somewhere else, they're going to pivot to Mike McCarthy. But I hope that they bring him in and let him, if you've taken so long to run this process and met with all of these people, please don't speed it up here at the end because you're worried about the Saints. You have other good candidates here. I do want to talk about one more because this is the other name that we hear about, and we'll talk about the field, but the name we hear about spoken with this job is Brian Flores, defensive coordinator currently with the Minnesota Vikings, former college teammate of one Mr. Ryan Poles. I don't see it. I don't see it. I don't think you can do this. You have Jaquan Brisker coming out and saying, I want an offensive minded head coach. And, we're good on defense. Go get an offensive minded guy and, we'll figure it out. You get your defensive players coming out and saying, please go hire an offensive coach. And then you go out and you hire your former college teammate who had a pretty terrible story come out about his time as head coach in Miami, where he pretty much made Tua Tagovailoa want to quit football because he was just being kind of impossible with him. I don't think that you can bring that in to a team that has a second-year quarterback.
I think Ryan Flores is going to be a guy that gets a shot again. He had to do some image rehabilitation. Like you said, his time in Miami, while they were fairly successful, and there was some questions about why are you firing him so short into his time there. The behind the scenes stuff kind of came out. We heard it from Ryan Fitzpatrick, who had some choice words about his time as a head coach. So I think he's kind of learned from his mistakes. He may have grown as a person, grown as a coach. He went to Pittsburgh, worked with Tomlin for a year. He's been in Minnesota. I know Taylor Dahl just a couple times she's now talked to some of the beat writers in Minnesota. Her last podcast is part of it spent on Flores and what he means to those players there. They love him. The defense loves him. The whole team kind of rallies around him. He has just got that head coach gene in him. He just kind of blew it his first chance. He may never get another shot, but I think if he does get another shot, it's going to have to be at a place that has an established quarterback. Go somewhere where the offense kind of already is its own thing, because again, he'll never shake that rep of ruining Tua, kind of getting in his head and kind of making him, question himself. The relationship between a head coach and a quarterback is the most important relationship in all of professional sports. You've got to be on the same page. You have to be aligned, 100%. And Flores for this team, to me, would be completely the wrong choice.
I can't see it happening. I really don't. I just image wise, especially after that article coming out and hiring
your buddy. Great.
Oh man, I don't think it can happen, but no. I may be wrong. You never know. I've certainly been wrong about this in the past. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I just don't think it's real, but I keep hearing his name put in. Maybe Bill listed those 4 names as the 4 that he's hearing and keeps coming up. Bill's talking to a lot of people that know a lot more things than most people. So, hey, at least cover it. I just don't see it. I don't think it's not a real possibility. Is there anybody in the rest of the field either they've interviewed or maybe somebody that you think they could interview, like a Marcus Freeman or somebody like that, that you think could be a factor in this if things stand the way they are, or maybe if things just start breaking in a way that breaks away from the Bears, right? So let's say the Saints hire McCarthy and the because the Jets hire Glenn and the Raiders get Johnson and maybe Monken goes to the Jags or something. Like maybe this all falls in a way where these names that we've talked about are maybe off the board. Is there somebody else that you think the Bears could maybe pivot to?
That scenario you just described to me would lead him to Brian Flores. So I hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, right. I mean,
but yeah, I mean, if something out of the blue, I mean, look, everyone likes Joe Brady with Buffalo Bills. He's kind of done some good stuff on offense there. He'd be a guy. But then you talk about that ESPN piece. He's a Trace Armstrong client. So are they going to distance themselves from that again? Or they kind of just say, the hell with it. This is the top choice. We're going to go after him, whether he's an Armstrong guy or not. He makes the most sense. But other than that, man, I just don't see where this is going to head here. I mean, if they make some out of left field guy, the whole Marcus Freeman thing, he's on record saying he has no interest in the NFL at this time. Maybe he wins a national championship. Maybe that changes with him, wanting a new goal. But I just don't see him viable at this point. We have heard that the Bears really like him. I'm guessing that's probably more Kevin Warren thing, but we'll kind of see how that shapes out. We did the roundtable from earlier this week or last week, and the one dark horse guy that I'd kind of be okay with is David Shaw. I just think he did some cool stuff at Stanford. Another guy that he's more known of as a college guy, but again, he spent almost a decade in the NFL coaching there. So I think he'd be a guy that I would talk myself into. But for me, Johnson, Monken, big gap. And then maybe McCarthy, maybe another big gap, maybe Shaw. I mean, look, they got to get this right. I mean, this is a huge hire for the franchise. It's got to be one of those top offensive minds. I would like Brady, but we haven't heard any buzz with Brady at all with the Bears.
No, and they didn't interview Liam Cohen. I mean, I've seen some people make some kind of left field suggestions from time to time as well, like, oh, well, maybe somebody comes in late that hasn't interviewed at all because that kind of guy comes in to take over the coaching search, right? Like, so I'm not saying this name is a real thing because this is not going to happen. But like, if you bring in a John Gruden late into the process, you're bringing him in because you're like, I'm not liking what I'm seeing, and like I'm going to come hire this guy, right? So like, I don't think there's anybody out there that interests me that's not in that conversation. There's probably a couple names, but they're bigger swings that you take when you don't have a good job and you're not the top job, which the Bears think that they are. And so you got, hey, we're like 7th or 8th pick here. We got to kind of take a swing on a guy that, give him a chance. There's some people that we could come up with in that, but that's not where the Bears are at. The Bears are in a position where they should be attracting one of these names. They say that they are. I guess my out of left field guy that I actually like is Pete Carroll. And I know some people are going to be 73 years old. And I agree. Like, I don't know how many years you can get out of a head coach. He's a very youthful individual. He's got a lot of energy. I think he would be interesting. And then maybe he has a succession plan that comes into place, or maybe he's just like, hey man, let's try to win one of these things in the next 3-4 years.
Yeah.
I can kind of dig it. Like, cause I like Pete Carroll. He's been in my football life for a long time, but that's like, down the list a little bit, but you could kind of sell me on it. I could get excited about a Pete Carroll regime, but that's not going to happen either. There's no sustained interest there, but apparently the Raiders, he might be the pivot for the Raiders if Johnson doesn't go there. So it's not like it's a crazy thought for a team to come in and give Pete, a few years to see if he can work his magic.
Yeah, I like Pete Carroll. I think he'd be fun as a content creator. I think he'd be kind of neat. Again, I talk myself into that hire. I'm like, okay, I can see how it works. But again, you got to go get an offensive guy. If your defensive players, Brisker had that tweet the other day where he kind of had something to say. Jalen Johnson's kind of talked about having an offensive guy. Caleb, obviously he wants an offensive guy. he was so excited when he got catfished, right? Where he thought he was going to get Ben Johnson. I mean, he was so excited about that, so I don't think you can kind of, you got to listen to your team, right? You can't just go get some, guy that isn't a good fit. You got to get the right fit, but where this franchise is at, go get that offensive guy, Johnson, Monken, McCarthy. It is what it is.
Yep, no question about it. All right, let's close before we maybe spend a couple minutes with the YouTube crowd. Anything final about this search, this organization? Anything you want to say before we're probably going to learn who the next head coach is by the end of the week, or we're going to have a really good idea of where they're going.
It seems like it's going to happen. I mean, the way the playoffs went, top candidates are available, unless they're really going to hold off for Joe Brady. I think something's going to happen soon here. And, the report this morning saying that McCarthy the Bears are his top choice. We'll see if it's reciprocated by the Bears, but, I think we'll have something done soon here. And they just got to get it right. They've got to get it right this time.
All right, we'll leave it there. We'll stick around a few minutes. For those of you wondering what our next show is, good question. I don't know. We'll be back at some point. We'll definitely do a breaking news show when the Bears get their new head coach. Maybe a Bear and Balance, maybe something different. But until we get back on a regular schedule, cross your fingers. Hope they get it right, and bear down, everybody. All right, what do we got here?
First off, right away, need polls to grow a pair and go all in on Ben. I think the Bears. I think he is the Bears' top choice, right? I mean, you think that's probably where the Bears are leaning.
Ben Johnson. I think so. I just don't know that it's reciprocated.
Yeah.
I want to highlight this one because I did see this one just now. This guy says, "You're ridiculous. Everyone shouldn't have a podcast. Terrible. I am out." I appreciate that. Yeah. We're not for everybody. I don't know. Watched a lot of Mike McCarthy in Dallas. It was stale and stale as hell at the end. Those Dallas teams are weird. They're super talented. Like, I don't know what to tell you. There's tons of blue chip talent on that roster. They scored a ton of defensive touchdowns too. So I know that has something to do with the overall point total. I think Deron Bland had like 5, pick sixes last year, right? Like they scored a lot on defense as well. Dan Quinn did a really good job with that defense over a couple years. I'm not seeing the creativity from that offense like I see in the Shanahan guys like McVay, Kyle Shanahan, how his systems run. I'm not seeing it like Ben Johnson crafting that for Jared Goff. That's how I see the league. If you think Mike McCarthy is a creative guy and you think that he has an offense that is just sustainable and he can go wherever and have success, then great. Like, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that he's able to do. I think it'll be fine, but I don't think it's cutting edge. I don't think it's creative or that great. I think it's a mirror, and I think he's got a lot of blue chip talent, and he hasn't done enough to elevate that to where Dallas would want to keep him. So that's my opinion. And you're certainly free to leave and not listen to me.
I mean, we said, it's a productive offense, but like you said, it's a mirror. It's, it's CeeDee Lamb. It's a great offensive line. It's a very good, Dak Prescott, very good quarterback, putting up, ridiculous numbers. And, is it more old school West Coast kind of style that he runs there? Yeah. I mean, is there a place for that in the league still? Sure, of course, but you've got a second-year quarterback, Caleb Williams. I think Mike McCarthy, again, he'd be fine. But you know what? I want him to kind of get paired up with the guy that has a creative vision. They kind of build that together. And if you bring in an established, old school guy like McCarthy, here's what I run it, basically. And could it work for Caleb? Probably, but I want him to come in and, like Ben Johnson discussed, we've kind of heard this again through some of the reports. He built his offense around his guy. I want to see what he can do, or Todd Monken can do, building an offense around Caleb Williams. That's what I want to see, because that's how you have the most success that can be sustained, is you get the offense built up around your guy and let them go nuts with it.
And, Caleb wanted to be Aaron Rodgers. So there you go. Maybe that's a beautiful pick. Maybe it's perfect. This one, Derek's got a suggestion. Do we think Tyrion Lannister should be the? I mean, you want to talk about cutthroat? You want to talk about a strategist, someone who really is willing to think 5-6 steps ahead on the play on the chessboard. That's Tyrion Lannister. So absolutely, he's a survivor. He's someone who can get out of a lot of pickles. So I absolutely think that that's the type of guy that you would want as a head coach, as a schemer. Certainly unmatched in that way. So that would be wonderful. Absolutely.
It's fun hearing you nerd out over some things. It's kind of neat.
Sure. Yeah. No. Hey man, I read the books before the show came out.
See?
That is a real thing. What else we got? Chris likes. Oh, sorry.
Boobery. No, it's all good. I gotta say the boobery word. I heard Bill say it on a podcast, his last podcast. I heard that, and I texted him right away. LOL, boobery. And look, if I text the word LOL, unless I'm being a sarcastic prick about it, but usually when I text LOL when it's something funny, I literally laugh out loud. Like I was on the train listening to that pod. He said, I'm thinking.
I knew it was coming. I was out for a walk. I knew he said it because he told us he said it.
Well, I texted about it in the chat we're in.
Yeah. So you let me in on it. So I knew that and I'm listening to it. So I was expecting it, and I still laughed out loud. So it's good. It's good. It's a good word, and it really is one of those perfect words that describes the situation.
I never knew it was a word. I've called Jordan McCaskey a boob for years, but hearing it used in this tense, boobery, oh man, it's just beautiful. So I immediately titled an article. I threw that in title as soon as he did it because I had to get it out there. Real quick here. What about Tampa's OC from Fusebox 23? Bears have not interviewed him. As far as I know, the only interview he took was Jacksonville, and there's a lot of buzz that he may be their front runner if they don't get Ben Johnson.
So they interviewed him for the OC job last year.
Yes.
And so there's some criticism. Well, why aren't you bringing him back to interview him for the head coaching job, et cetera. They may not like him. They may not vibe with him, right? Like they may have, or maybe they feel a little embarrassed, right? Like, Kingsbury's not taking the interview for the head coaching job. He said he's fine. He's, so maybe those guys that got brought in for that OC job, they had tremendous success, not in Chicago. And so maybe it's both sides just kind of being like, no, thanks. I'm not interested in going back there. You could have had me as an OC, and I'm not running back there, 12 months later.
Again, like these reports that kind of leak, right? I mean, we heard all these reports. Oh, the Bears request interview with this guy or this guy or this guy. They're not going to put that out there as a request unless they've, again, talked through the back channels and like, hey, we'd like to have an interview with you. Okay, let's set it up. Now let's leak it to the press.
Now it's requested an interview. Yeah,
they're not going to leak it to the press and then have themselves be embarrassed where what happened to this? It never materialized. And there's a couple out there where the Bears, it did get leaked. I think there was a Vance Joseph is the one that a lot of Chicago media keep going back to. Well, this never happened. That keeps getting reported that it was in place. So sometimes the timing doesn't work out with coach and franchise. So that may have been one of them, but you're not going to put that out there unless you actually know for a fact. So like you said, maybe it just didn't vibe. Maybe he didn't get along with Warren or McCaskey or Poles. And he's like, nah, I'm going to do my thing. And you guys keep doing your thing.
I think that's about it. Although, I mean, this is just a funny typo, but Victor, choosing a couch is a lot like choosing a quarterback. It's a gamble. I mean, I guess if you're ordering online, just go to one of those furniture marts and sit down in them, kind of check it out.
I saw this and I'm like, that's true because we had a couch here. We got one of those big sectionals and we bought it in a place, one of these big, warehouse.
Yeah.
Places. We tried it out. We loved it. We thought it was great. We got it home. And after a few months of sitting in it, it killed my back. I'm like, this couch sucks.
That's true. It is a gamble. Furniture is a gamble.
Pissed.
It's true. Got to go with the brands, I guess.
So this is true.
Go with the respected brands.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that feels like enough for speculation and responding to an article that I'm telling you, good on Kalyn Kahler. That was an excellent piece of reporting. I think it's, the article means a lot more than just what we focused on. I wanted to focus on the parts that I thought were pretty relevant in how the Bears are perceived in different circles around the league, and how, I think it really reflects a lot of the things that we have been suspecting in terms of these decision makers. And I used to just think it was kind of a crank kind of argument. Like people were just, it's the mechanic. They got to sell the team. The Bears are never going to be good until they sell. I was like, like whatever. Like they don't matter. Like it's these decision makers. And the more that you get into this and the more you hear and the more that becomes public, it's like, oh, actually this is a real thing. They are negatively impacting this organization. They are an anchor. And the only way that they're going to fix this is either getting out of the way, either by selling it or by fully recognizing they get out of the way. They need to turn over the chairmanship into somebody that maybe has a little bit better of a football mind, to be able to step into that role and not get taken advantage of, and maybe make good decisions. And or they got to get lucky.
Lucky. I think it's got to be luck.
It's luck.
I mean, look, I was pretty high on the Warren hire at a time.
Yeah.
And this last pressers they had, I'm like, oh, what is this guy? Like, some of the stuff he said, you're just like questioning. It's like, what's going on? And look, I get the complaint that he's essentially was brought in as the point person for the stadium, and that's kind of hit a snag. And look, let's just get it done, man. Get everything done. Get this franchise on track. Get that stadium. Put the shovels in the ground. Get the right head coach. Figure out the GM situation. Winning culture. Let's get some wins here. I'm so sick of this. The continued boobery from this franchise.
Continued boobery. Good place to end it. We'll get out of here. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, and somebody will be back at some point this week, I'm sure, to talk more Bears.
We got some stuff for sure.
We got some stuff. All right. Thanks, everybody.